Well, hey, everyone, welcome to Sundance. Thanks so much for taking your time to be here with us. We really want to express our gratitude to the Impact Lounge and all the staff that made this presentation and this opportunity happen. It was very short notice, but we're really blessed to be here. I was actually here last week, Thursday and Friday only, and I popped in for one of the conversations in the main lounge, and I was so blown away. I told my staff, I said, listen, I had to go home for the weekend to get some things done. But I said, if you can get us a spot, I was thinking maybe next year. I said, let me know. And pretty soon, all of a sudden, I don't think I had landed yet, even in Lincoln. And she says, you're coming back on Tuesday. And I said, okay, here we are. So anyway, so again, appreciate your willingness to be here. Is this, where do I point? I want to point that way. Okay, great. All right. Well, maybe. Max, where am I pointing? Okay, it's just a delay. All right. Okay, well, I'm here to talk to you about the Sorghum United Foundation as well as the Sorgho Squad. My name is Nate Blum. I'm the CEO of the Sorghum United Foundation. We'll talk more about what that is here in a moment. And the Sorgho Squad, we'll talk more about that as well. It's a multimedia consumer engagement platform that we are developing and have developed, and you'll learn more about that. I'm the author of the books. The illustrations are done by someone locally there in Nebraska. So what I like to tell people is the illustrations are fantastic. The writing is No, they've actually been very good. Is this just like on a rolling? Can I stop it, or how does this work? Just cue you? Okay, I'll cue you. So before we talk about what it is that we do, I think it's really important to get a sense for what it is that we're trying to address and why this is important, right? So you're all familiar with Psychology 101 freshman year in college. You got Mr. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when you look at the bottom of this, the physiological needs, who can tell me, don't read it, who can tell me what are the physiological needs that people need at the bottom of that Maslow's pyramid? Anyone? Now, this is an interactive talk, so I'm going to pick on somebody if you don't answer. Name one.
Air, food, water.
Air, food, and water. He read the slide. Right. Air, food, water, shelter. These are the basic things that people need to be successful on their path towards self-actualization. Now, I've worked in the past. I worked for a member of U.S. Congress. I've worked running a state director as a state director of an agency in Nebraska. I serve, I should say, on a private sector advisory committee to the Committee on Food Security at the United Nations FAO, and I also serve on a advisory committee at the USDA. Right? So when I look at Maslow here, I don't just think about the individual. I think about, okay, how do we apply this to the larger picture, to entire countries, to entire security systems, foods, whether they're global security, local security, national security. And I got to tell you, when I'm talking with leaders, I always remind them that there is no such thing as security and prosperity without food security. Right? So this is the space in which we work. I mentioned earlier Sorghum United and the Sorgho Squad. We work in the millet space also, but not really. And here's what I tell my team. The spaces in which we actually work are those around food security, nutritious food, right? Because this is a big problem. We got a lot of food that looks like food, but it's not really food, right? Economic prosperity. Right? I grew up on a farm. I know what it's like to be land rich and cash poor, even here in the U.S., let alone in places like Africa and Asia, all right, South America, Central America. And then also in the environmental sustainability space. You know, climates are changing. And here in the U.S., we look at this as sometimes a political issue, and it really shouldn't be. I travel all over the world, I can tell you. And I can point exactly. Mediterranean Basin is a great example of where climates are changing. I've been to plenty of villages in Kenya, for example, or Zimbabwe, where they have been growing maize for a few generations, and now the maize doesn't grow, right? Now they're dependent on U.S. food aid, typically. So there's a lot of challenges that we have to look at when we're talking about how do we address that basic fundamental piece of Maslow's pyramid. So the climactic challenges are one. Resource challenges, a lot of places, farmers don't have good access to seeds. They don't have good access to maybe inputs. Mechanization is certainly a problem, right? A lot of places, in particular around sorghum and millets, they plant it by hand, they harvest it by hand, they thresh it by hand. I mean, this is crazy. It's 2025, but we're still doing this. In some places, actually, when they thresh it, threshing, if you don't know, is just getting the grain off the stalk. They'll literally put it in the road, and they'll drive over it with their cars. So we know we can do better. The mechanization technology is there. It's just getting it in an affordable way to the people who need it, right? But it's not just the farmers either. It's also creating the economic opportunities for folks. The basis of any economy always comes back down to agriculture and food production. And it's not the farmers necessarily, it's all the adjacent industry around that. The FFA here in the U.S. likes to say that there are 435 careers in agriculture. Only 2 of those are farmer and rancher, right? So when we take away the ability for people to grow their own food, we're also taking away the ability for people to provide, say, the manufacturing for small-scale mechanization. We're taking away the ability for seed companies to produce more seed to sell into that market, right? We're taking away the opportunities for processors to create new products and new jobs that then sell into the markets. These are the foundational things of any economy. And so without that food system in place, we lose all these things. And then you run into things like social unrest, political instability, crime. These are all things that happen when food and economic opportunities become scarce. And so this is why the work that we do is really important, I think. Nutrition challenges are another big piece. According to the United Nations, 22.3% of all children under the age of 5 around the world experience stunting. And if you're not familiar with what stunting is, that's where you might see a kid who's 3 or 4 years old, but they look like they're 2, right? It affects brain development, it affects physical development. And you think we have a population of, 9 billion people? So what's 22.3% of that? This is a big problem, all right? A lot of people also lack access to just basic nutrition, not just for them, but also not just for the children, but also as an adult. And we'll talk more about that as well. Political and policy challenges. Again, I used to work for a member of Congress. I ran a state agency. Politics and food are inexorably intertwined, right? And we have to recognize that when we're talking about changing food systems, we have to also address these policy issues. One example in the sorghum and millet space, all right? The U.S., and you may not know this, is actually the largest producer of grain sorghum in the world, all right? 93% of our grain sorghum traditionally is exported to China. 93% of what we grow here is sent as cheaply as possible to China. They make something called baijiu with it. Baijiu is an alcoholic spirit. It's like whiskey. It tastes like fire and regret all at the same time. Yep. But it's a cultural touchstone in China. And if you go to a formal dinner in China, they're serving you shots of baijiu all night. And because of the population in China, it is actually the world's most widely drank spirit that most people have never heard of, right? So last year, in fact, China actually bought 93% of the world's supply of sorghum. Now, I don't mind trade. I sit on a trade advisory committee at USDA. I'm all about trade, all right? But I can tell you there's not much value in that for our farmers, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit, all right? The other thing I'd tell you is I don't care what business you have, if 93% of your business is dependent upon one customer, you got a big problem, right? That means they can control your prices, and that's what's happened, right? On the other side of that, of course, the systems that are in place, they are happy with it being the way it is. So obviously there's a little pushback. Even here at home, the way we do agriculture, I was the director of the Nebraska Grain Sorghum Board, a checkoff program. If you're unfamiliar with how those work, checkoff programs are funded by farmers through a small tax, usually based on the acres and or the value for which grain is sold. Right? Now, unfortunately, and the point of the groups is to be able to then fund research, do advocacy, increase trade for that grain. And there's a lot of good things that those groups do. So, again, I don't want to get run out of the state of Nebraska where I live because it's a big deal. And I like what they do. However, the system itself, the way it's set up, creates an antagonistic system, right? So if I'm growing sorghum, my budget is going to be based on how many of my farmers are growing sorghum. Not on how well my farmers are doing. It's based on how many acres they planted, how many acres they harvested, right? Not based on how they're doing overall. And this is true for other grains as well. So what we've created are these conditions in which we have a culture that propagates monoculture cropping systems. I grew up on a farm. In rotation on that farm, we grew beans, sorghum, we call it milo here in North America, beans, sorghum, and wheat. Since the 1990s, that whole area has been corn on soybeans. As a result, we've lost biodiversity. You couldn't throw a rock in the 1980s without hitting a pheasant. I mean, not that we love pheasants. We don't want to throw rocks. Don't throw rocks at pheasants. That's the first thing we take out of this conversation. But they were everywhere, right? Pollinators everywhere. Now that it's just corn on soybean, we've lost that. The pollinators are gone. The birds are gone. The soil health, the soil biology, and soil is never dirt. Scientists will tell you soil is never dirt. There's microbiology in there. That is largely destroyed as well, because we're missing other crops within cropping systems. So we like corn, we like soybean, we like wheat, we like rice, but the point of what we're doing is that there's room on the plate for everybody, all right? And the grains that we're talking about in particular are undervalued, underutilized. So we already talked about the regional and global security challenges as well that happen when people are unable to fit that basic foundation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So let's go ahead and move on to the next slide if you don't mind. Okay, so we talked about the problem. Let me tell you why you should care about sorghum and millets. Remember I said earlier nobody cares about sorghum and millets? They don't. Okay, but now we're talking about sustainability, food security, prosperity. Maybe now you might care about why sorghum and millets are solutions, not the only solution, but solutions within these systems. So I love this graphic. This is, and I can send this to you if it's too small to read, I get it. But this is from one of our academic partners, and it has a number of different millets and then sorghum compared nutritively with corn, rice, and wheat. And what you find is it's not even fair. From a calcium standpoint, an iron standpoint, a protein standpoint, a fiber standpoint, these grains are fantastic. In fact, they're so good that they're often used. In fact, we're working on a project in Colombia right now, but they're often used in porridges for orphanages in places that are disparaged and experiencing things like stunting. They're literally, you know, if blueberries are a superfood, these are a superfood, right? But again, they're one that most people have never heard of, right? So before I address the rest on this, let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Max. I didn't have very much time to put this presentation together, but I have been working on a new one anyway. I'm speaking at several food, science, nutrition, technology shows around the world here in 2025. So this forced me on short notice to kind of push things together. So anyway, I think it's fine. So let's talk about research. All right, so you saw the nutritive qualities for sorghum and millets and why those matter. There's actually scientific research that shows why they matter as well. 2 years ago, in the journal Nature, there was an article published by the Food for Health Center, which happens to be in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I live, that talked about the role of sorghum in particular in rebalancing the human gut microbiome. Now, who knows what the human gut microbiome is? Yeah. Okay. So you want to tell us what it is, Heather? Oh, geez.
Yeah. I'll give a thorough, comprehensive description. But no, the amount of microorganisms, including bacteria, that keep our guts working the way they should, and also linked to our brain and our emotions.
Very well done. Like I said, this is an interactive talk. So I mean, if you don't volunteer, I will volunteer you. So why would these grains be good at balancing the human gut microbiome? Well, let's think about evolution for a moment. These are amongst the first grains that were ever grown by mankind. They came out of places like Ethiopia, Mesopotamia, India. In fact, I'm doing an archaeology conference in, I think, Kanpur here in a couple of months with a gentleman who has been studying the Harappan civilization, and he's been able to link seed DNA in northern Egypt and Mesopotamia with trade routes from Lothal, which was an ancient Harappan site in northwest India. So, I mean, these are things that humans have been growing forever and ever and ever. The reason you've never heard of them is something I like to call it a post-colonial hangover, right? So when European powers went into these places, Africa, the Middle East, Asia, they didn't know what millets are because millets are not native to Europe. Okay, so they convinced everyone. They said, "Hey, these are the poor man's grains. You want to grow maize, you want to grow rice, all this other stuff. Don't grow these." And it's only now, a few hundred years later, where we're actually getting back to these grains. The Indians have actually done a really good job pushing millets. They were behind the International Year of Millets in 2023 at the United Nations FAO. We were at the opening ceremony. We presented at the closing ceremony for that. I'm in Rome way too often now because of that. But some other research too. There's over 200 different peer-reviewed published research papers from academic institutions around the world that all show the same things. And those same things are that these grains are very good for combating diabetes. They're lower on the glycemic index. So you stay fuller longer. It's more helpful to manage those blood sugars, okay, as well as weight loss. Anti-inflammatory benefits. Anti-carcinogenic benefits, heart health benefits, and more. So, like to put a little bit of science behind it, so you don't think I'm just up here telling you, selling you snake oil. There are people much smarter than I am who are working on this, and we just regurgitate their findings. Max, if we can go on to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about climate also. We talked about health. We talked about why that's important. Climate change is obviously something that's very important to everyone in this room. It's obviously something that's very important within the entertainment industry from everything I've seen here at Sundance in the last few days. So finding narratives to help people to make a change in a changing climate is important. I love this slide. So sorghum uses about a third of the water of corn, okay? Other millets like foxtail millet use as little as a tenth of the water of corn. This slide comes to us from, I think, New Mexico State University. And this is a cover crop, so they probably did some barley or something like that. And then in rotation, the next one, they planted sorghum. You see the water table in blue? Water table went down with cover crop. It actually replenished with sorghum, right? Now, we don't know what the environmental conditions were at the time, but it's New Mexico. We can't imagine they were getting a ton of rain, all right? And then you see again, cover crop dips down. The fourth rotation there, you have sorghum again, right? So from a water conservation standpoint, these grains are really, really, really important. They're drought resistant also. So I don't know, who all has a front lawn or a back lawn? Yeah. What happens to your lawn when it doesn't rain for a while and you don't water it? It turns brown. But then what happens when you water it again? It turns green. So did your grass die? No, it just went dormant. So the beauty of millets in particular is most of them are members of the Poaceae grass family. So they're just like a grass. So they do that same thing. In a drought, it will affect the yield of the grain, right? But at least you'll still have a yield. And that's why these grains are really important in places like even western Nebraska where I live. That's where we grow most of our grain sorghum because there's not a lot of water there, right? And we talk about western U.S., it's not exactly getting wetter, is it? Right? It's getting drier. Carbon sequestration is another really important thing. Texas A&M University published a paper just a couple years ago now also that showed because of the larger root system that sorghum in particular has, it captures more carbon and sequesters it deeper and longer in the soil. A lot of countries, Nigeria is one of them that's doing this, they're planting sorghum and calling it a carbon sink, right? Which, by the way, this is another opportunity for economic benefit for farmers as the carbon markets continue to develop and trade, right? So if they're planting carbon C4 crops, which is what we call these, there's an opportunity to take advantage of that as well. Soil health, I just mentioned a large root biomass that goes down 6 feet in the soil. It breaks up something called the compaction layer, and that allows crops following in rotation to become more drought resistant, access more nutrients, and hardier. In fact, we know from Kansas State University that maize following sorghum in rotation will see an increase of about 8% in yield just because of that. It also it fixes more nitrogen in the soil, leaves more biology in the soil, and that's good for that soil microbiome. Trust me, we get through all the science stuff, it will become more interesting, I promise. But I wanted to really lay the foundation about why you should care before we tell you what it is that we do and why we do it. And then wildlife habitat, I mentioned earlier birds, quail, pheasants. Like it or not, birds are actually one of the biggest challenges for sorghum and millets farmers around the world. And everybody's looking for a better solution to control birds. Sometimes they'll take as much as 25% of the farmer's yield. Now, I asked a farmer that's a smallholder farmer in the north of India once. I said, well, how do you manage birds? And he says, well, we don't. We just say that's God's portion. Well, it was funny, but his thought about that actually was really profound because what he was saying is they need the birds also, right? The birds are part of the ecosystem. So if they lose a little bit, that's the price they pay for the benefit they get, right? And then pollinators, of course, as I said, pollinators absolutely love these grains. I know Utah is a big bee state, I've learned. Lots of bees here. We met with some folks on Main Street there with a hive collective, and we're looking for ways in which to partner with them as well. So this is really important stuff. All right, Max, yeah, you can go to the next one. All right, one last bit of technicality before we get into the why we do, or the what we do, I should say, because this is all the why, right? So I mentioned I'm a farm kid, and so I want to share with you a little bit about my experience in that model that we currently have, right? And tell you where the challenges might lie within that. So broadly speaking, so anybody who's watching this at home or is an ag economist or whatever, they're going to say, oh, that's you're painting with a broad brush, and I am for the purpose of this conversation. But typically in a commodity, what's the one thing you can't control? If you're a grower, if you're a producer, what is the one thing that you can't control in a commodity market? Anybody? What is it? Kind of consumers. It's tied to that. What else? Any ideas? Price. Yes. You can't control price. So what we have right now in agriculture is if I'm a farmer, and this is true in the U.S., it's true anywhere else in the world, all right? If I'm a farmer, I'm going to grow as much as I possibly can. That's how I'm going to stay competitive. My neighbor is going to do the same thing, by the way. Now, when we grow as much as we possibly can, we've increased our input prices. And when we harvest at the same time and we go to take that to sell it, what happens when we put more of a product on the market? What happens to the price? Does it go up or down? It falls, right? So we've raised more, but in so doing, we've increased our input prices. And then when we've sold it for less. So what do our margins look like? Probably not very good, okay? Now, before anybody goes off the handle and says, oh my gosh, they're anti-commodity markets, get him off that USDA committee, that's not the case. Commodity markets are very important. This is how we provide inexpensive food. This is how we make sure that even the most economically disparaged populations have access to food. This is important stuff, all right? But from a farmer standpoint, it doesn't always do us the favors we need it to, right? So what we really talk about, oh, and by the way, this is really forced farm consolidations. My family farm, which we finally had to sell a couple years ago, we had about 760 acres, small farm, okay? The people we sold it to have 17,000 acres. And by the way, that's not a manufacturer or a factory farm. I want to be really clear on this. Size does not indicate that. It actually literally is a family farm. It's 3 brothers and now all of their kids who are running it. But the little guys can't stay in business, and so this is just what happens. So I'm not demonizing them for their success, but we also have to make a distinction between what is a factory farm and what is not. And it's not size necessarily. But it's also promoted these monoculture cropping systems. I mentioned it earlier. Corn on soybeans is not a rotation, but that's what we have in much of the Midwest. Okay? Volume over value, again, in the commodity marketing system, it's all about how much you grow, not how much you sell it for, right? I'm more interested in value, right? Why would I want to work harder if I can sell my product, less of it for more money, right? Be smart about it. And then as I mentioned with China, this overdependence on singular trading partners, and this is particularly true in sorghum, but there was a time not too long ago when soybean had the same problem. It was only like 10 years ago that like every third row of soybeans went to China as well. Now, what the soybean industry did was they were able to start looking at additional opportunities for value, right? So now you're seeing soybean oil being used to create sustainable jet fuel, which is amazing. I think, was it Adidas or New Balance or somebody has a tennis shoe made with soybean? This is great, but other industries haven't done that. And as I mentioned earlier, this underdevelopment of regional value chains that impacts human migration, it impacts crime, it impacts human health, job creation, political stability. These are all the spaces in which we work and why we work in that space. Let's go on to the next slide. So what we really push for at Sorghum United, and this is, I think, the real work that we do, is we want to see more local value addition. I call it processing proximate to the production of grains, right? Whether they're making food, fuel, or fiber products with sustainable grains, sorghum and millets, okay? And then they're able to, through direct contracting, work with a local partner, right? So if they want to sell their maize and their rice in the commodity market within their farm system, that's great. That's fine. But at least one portion of that cropping system, maybe, you or mitigate that commodity marketing risk through direct contracting. And why this is important for sorghum and millets is because different things that you're making require different varieties of these grains, right? So if I'm making flour with grain sorghum, for example, I want a white or a cream-colored sorghum variety because when I do that, it's flavor neutral and my flour doesn't turn gray, okay? But if I'm wanting to make beer or baijiu, then I want a red or a waxy sorghum, right? So depending on what my end use is, I'm going to be able to work with my farmers and pay them a little extra to grow the variety that I need them to grow in the way in which I need them to grow it. This is a value for the farmer. It's also a value for the processor. Decreased supply chains, local production of local food products that are highly nutritive that can address the nutrition as well as the availability of food locally. This is really important. So let's go on to the next. Okay, so this brings me to what we are. Now, we've gotten through all the boring stuff. So let me tell you what the Sorghum United Foundation is. So we are a grassroots organization consisting of over 4,000 stakeholders now on every continent except for Antarctica. We did try to expand into Antarctica, but the penguins will not learn how to type. We keep trying. You know, I think they're a little foul. Thanks. They're not good jokes, but they are jokes. Those stakeholders represent all points in the value chain. So we're not just talking about farmers. We're talking about researchers, processors, input providers, investment bankers, and frankly, even people who are just concerned about food security and climate issues, right? Because that's the space we're really working in. We've created platforms in which typically right now through like WhatsApp and LinkedIn and things like this, where there's an exchange of ideas and research, which is awesome because we're not tied to any one state. We're not taxpayer funded. That means that regardless of geopolitical realities or geography, we're able to connect people all over the world. This makes for some really cool conversations. That's where we started. We started in 2023 just building this grassroots group of international stakeholders. Now in 2025, we have staff all over the world. We've got an office in Varanasi, India, with our regional director covering Asia and Asia, the Pacific, and the MENA region. We have an office in Nairobi, where our human resources as well as our Africa director resides, and we're doing work all over that region. East Africa, West Africa is coming along too. We have a director in the Caribbean, and she's handling Latin America and South America for us. We're gearing up for some projects in Brazil as well as Colombia. Miss Monique Stinson is right back here taking photos. She's our Vice President of Media and Marketing. She's in Laguna Beach, California. And she's no slouch by herself, by the way. I'm going to brag her up a bit. First of all, she's the reason I'm here in front of you today. But second of all, she is a 2-time Emmy Award-winning producer. And big clap for her. Big clap for her. She's actually done a documentary trilogy now that she's also here promoting about the pandemic and the endemic. What did that do to our society? So a little side note, talk to Monique later about that. Her work has been really, really good. We have a comms director and comms associate also in Brooklyn, New York. And we just brought on some new staff, a fundraiser in Los Angeles named Lainey Strauss for our foundation. We brought it on a new, what do I want to call her? A strategic development manager. And her name is Jen Ray Wong. Jen Ray used to be the comms director for NASA. So I think we're doing okay, right? Like we're out kicking our coverage. Let's put it that way. So in 2025, with our partners around the world, we're actually doing now what we call field to market trials, right? And this is where actually we need investment help from people with our foundation. So the field to market trials are intended to not only partner with academic institutions, private sector, governments, and farmers to show them that, hey, these grains can grow here, right? And this is what the yields look like, this is how you manage it. But also, how do we work with those local input providers to, for example, give them the schematics to make small-scale mechanization? It's a good example because what happens a lot now if I'm in, say, Zimbabwe, okay? The only way I can get small-scale mechanization, I'm talking for planting, harvesting, threshing, or even processing, is usually a very poor quality equipment coming from China, which takes months to get there, and then when it breaks, which it often does, no one knows how to fix it, right? So we don't want to go in there and just give equipment. We want to teach the manufacturers, the local manufacturers, how do you make this yourself? So we license the schematics from a company called Bish Enterprises in Nebraska, good friends of mine. And then we give those to those fabricators so that they can not only have the engineering already done for them, but then they can figure out how to make it their own. And when it breaks, they know how to fix it. And by the way, they're creating more jobs and markets locally. We don't give, we empower. This is what we do. This is our mantra, our motto. All right. So working with those input providers, then also all the way down to processing, showing the products that can be made with these grains, right? And it's not about introducing new products into a market. It's about changing formulations for existing products, right? You want an Oreo cookie? Fantastic. I love Oreos, as you can tell. But if I can buy an Oreo that's made with more nutritive grains, why wouldn't I do that, right? Which is another conversation I'm having at these food technology conferences around the world this year, which is how do you maintain the nutritive value through processing? And that's another challenge that we won't talk about today, but it is one that we're working on. Yeah, so let's go ahead and go to the next one, Max. And this is a video, I want to give you just a flavor of some of the places that we visit. This is a video taken in North Pokot, Kenya, which is very rural, very dry. This is one of those communities that has been growing maize, but they can't grow it anymore, and now they can't feed themselves. And, we're trying to help them remember what they used to grow, what the grandparents and great-grandparents used to grow to help them break this cycle. So, Max, if you want to play that video, that'd be great. Do you want me to try on this? Okay. Oh, nope, back one. Is there not a link or anything? Does it not work? No, I'm sorry. Well, anyway, you would have gotten to see me dance with beads, which was amazing. But it's on our YouTube, so you can find it. It's no problem. The reason for these next couple slides is because we've talked about the science, we've talked about the sustainability piece, we've talked about who we are, but why we do what we do is really about the people, right? And again, it's not just people in Africa and Asia, it's people here. We need to do better for our farmers. So if you go to the next slide, there's some raw video here. I didn't even have time to put subtitles to them. So the first one here is a village we visited in Binga, which is in Zimbabwe. Very rural, very difficult to get there, and a lot of challenges. So you'll hear her speaking in her native language, and then there is some interpretation. The next three videos are very, very short, and they were just sent to me by one of our fellows in India, where she did some farm visits the other day. I didn't have time to translate them, so unless you know Hindi, it won't mean much, but you'll at least get to see the farmers. So if you want to go with the first video, that'd be great.
Greetings, Gogo. Gogo, tell us what are the problems you are facing here in Binga concerning the farming of sorghum?
Ingali mapenzi ngimwe kuswana angawo mubulimi bwa mayira.
Imayira nimvula byetuusike nga twajjana gutigiriwo nvula nga toologa olozikoppe gutigiriwo nvula nga toologa olozidengwe gutigiriwo nvula toologa bono tulanzala molitala nkitulya.
The challenge that we have, especially this year, last year we did not receive enough rains, so we have a challenge. We have a challenge that we don't have seeds. To start plowing this year.
Okay. How many problems do you think you are facing here in Binga?
Ngali mapenzi ngimuyeya logonyebo ngimuli kujana kamuli mu Binga omu.
Tukumbira mbowo kuti mutugwasizie mbuto achagulia.
Mapenzi ngali ngimuli kujana.
gitongera mapenzi
amubinga omwe
ongaye mapenzi akulya kunsala akuti mutu gwasizye mbuto twabu yumulango kono tage
so
mputa
our largest problem is that you need to help us with the seed because as she has stated that last year they did not have enough rains, so they did not harvest. That's one of the challenges that she has.
Okay, thank you, Gogo. So my next question is,
Max, for the sake of time, let's
what
go
are
ahead
the
and cut there.
challenges women are facing here in?
We'll have those videos up on our YouTube and things like that too when they get cleaned up. For the sake of time, I just want to tell you a little bit about Binga. So the people you see behind you in these blue and orange outfits, those are miners. So the primary job opportunities within the region are mining. In Zimbabwe, well, the president owns everything. It's that kind of a place. But in addition to that, it's owned by the Chinese, which again, I'm not anti-Chinese, but CCP I do have a problem with. So what happens is, like a lot of places in Africa, resources get extracted unfairly to the population. But this is the primary opportunity that they have for employment, so what do? The farm community we visited there, they grow primarily sorghum because they don't have the water. You heard her say that. The problem they have is their only market is the brewery. In Africa, sorghum is typically animal feed or beer. Okay? Now, the brewery down the road knows that they're the only market. I talked with one farmer in this community who hadn't been paid for 8 years for his grain. Okay? And I said, why do you still do business with a company that hasn't paid you in 8 years? He says, well, I don't have anyone else to do business with. I don't have any other market. And if I got to grow it, right? And if I don't sell it, it'll rot. And so I do this. So when we go in there and we have a conversation with the community and we say, hey, you make ugali. I think it's a different name in Zimbabwe. In Kenya, it's ugali, but it's a bread, right? Everybody eats this. And it's made with sorghum and millets. I said, why don't you just learn how to make the best damn ugali and sell it to the next community over? Why don't you start creating your own markets, right? Instead of being dependent upon someone else, how do we empower you to create more value? This is just what I was talking about, local value addition. How do we empower you to create more value that you can sell into markets, create jobs, and economic prosperity? Now, the other challenge in this community, a lot of these communities, remember, so they're growing their sorghum, right? They're selling it, but they're not making money. That means the kids don't go to school. We're driving down the Binga Road, which is basically a dirt cattle path. It took us 12 hours to go 140 miles. My back still hurts. This was in November. And you see these young people walking with bags of USAID grain on their heads, going from the distribution center back to the village. These are kids who should be in school. But they can't afford to go to school. And the community, even though they're growing food, they're selling it all, and they can't feed themselves. Communities that produce food should be the last ones that go hungry. The 2% of the global population that's directly involved in agriculture shouldn't be the poorest people on the planet. They feed 98% of us. They feed the rest of us. But they are. And it's because we need to help find the constructs in which they can get more value for their grains while also continuing the affordability that the commodity marketing model offers. So it's not a this or that, it's a this and. The next couple of videos are very short. Again, these ones came to us from one of our interns in India. So Max, if you want to just run through those quick. They're in Hindi, but I just want you to see this is a husband and wife who are smallholder farmers. A smallholder farmer typically is 1 to 2 hectares, by the way, globally, which would be about 5 acres.
आपण ज्वारीच्या क्षेत्राकडे वळलं पाहिजे, पण या ज्वारीच्या क्षेत्राकडे न वळण्याची काही जी प्रमुख कारणं आहेत त्या कारणामध्ये ज्वारीची काढणी करण्यासाठी मजूर मिळत नाहीत आणि ज्वारी हुरड्यात आली असता ज्वारीला पक्ष्यांपासून मोठा त्रास संभवतो आणि त्याचं उत्पादन त्याच्यामुळं घटतं. अशा कारणामुळं ज्वारीच्या क्षेत्रामध्ये घट झालेली आहे आणि ती घट जर भरून काढायची जर असेल तर शास्त्रज्ञाने अनेक पद्धतीने यावर प्रयोग करणं अपेक्षित आहे.
So you heard him say the word jawari. Remember that word because you're going to hear about it here in the next segment. Go ahead to the next.
आमच्या शेतामध्ये आम्ही घरच्या घरीच शेती करतो. खुरपणी घरच्या घरीच करतो.
There you go. And then I think the last one is just them walking in the field together, which you can go ahead and play. We have a great group of. Hi. That's okay. I smell like ham. I get it. We have a great group of young people in both Mumbai and Pune, India, who are nutritionist, I don't want to say graduate students, that came to us and said, we want to do internships. And I said no, and they said, we don't care. We'll do it for free if we have to. And nobody in our organization works for free except for me. So we found a way to make that work. And we've got 7 in this first tranche, by the way, doing project-based internships. Those came from Miss Harini Yera is her name. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, it's one thing to say that the markets are there. It's another thing to know what those markets look like. So just like earlier when I said nobody cares about sorghum and millets, they care about food security and environmental sustainability. When it comes to buying food, they also care about traits that sorghum and millets have, but they don't necessarily care that they are sorghum and millets. So a few years ago, this is 2019 data, so this has only changed since then, but this is global data. We wanted to break out what some of the value for some of these traits are, right? So just anyone out there thinking that we're just trying to do humanitarian work, that's true, but there's also money to be made in it, and this is why it's really important. So for nutraceuticals, you see 173, almost $174 billion. That CAGR, C-A-G-R, that's the compound annual growth rate. So 7.7% compound annual growth. But look at the non-GMO, 16.5, almost $1 billion, right? 16.5% compound annual growth. I don't know about you, but if my investments saw a 16.5% compound annual growth, well, I'd still be here because I like what I do, but I wouldn't have to be here. I mean, that's amazing, right? Ethically labeled or sustainable, you can see that as well. I hate to read off slides. I'm not going to do that to you. And then the gluten-free, the same. So we can show that the market's values are there. Those numbers have only grown since 2019. We actually need to redo that slide. So I'll have to get an intern on that, or a fellow on that. All right, so let's go to the next slide, and then we're about getting into the actual entertainment piece. But I wanted you to know why it mattered before. So even though we're here to promote the entertainment arm, to promote the marketing arm, I felt it was important for you to be invested in why that matters before we did that. So just really quick, what are some of the uses for sorghum and millets? They're food, fuel, and fiber, basically anything you can do with any other grain. The fastest growing market in the U.S. is actually pet food, believe it or not. Gerber now has a line of baby food where they're using sorghum and millets. But it can be popped, it can be made into a flour, it can be made into a crisp, flaked, extruded like a Cheeto, all these different things. Obviously, alcohol is a big deal. Like I said, beer in Africa, baijiu in China is a big deal. Interestingly enough, a few years ago, Buffalo Trace, if you know Buffalo Trace, is a distillery here, they made a baijiu-style drink, a very small batch, and they sold it. It was sold out almost instantly. And then the last I looked, even a year later, on the secondary market, those bottles were selling for $1,000 a piece. So there's money to be made there. But ethanol is a big thing in Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma. They use a lot of sorghum for ethanol. We don't in Nebraska just because we have so much corn. But then building materials as well. In the South, some of you might be familiar with sorghum syrup. That comes from the large, there's the grain sorghum, which is smaller with a big head. Then there's the really tall sorghums, like 11 feet tall, big stalk, little head. That's where the sorghum syrup comes from. It gets pressed out of there. But you can use the fibers from that stalk also to make things like temporary building materials, clothes, anything like that. All right, so there's the opportunities. Let's move on, Max, to the next one. Now, here's the intersection of why you should care. Rather, the intersection of where entertainment meets the mission. So we know that consumers cannot demand a product if they don't know that it exists, right? And we also know that in the agricultural space, all too often, it's a conversation of us versus them sometimes, right? Like, you're right, I'm wrong, that sort of thing. And that's instantly turns both parties off. And most importantly, we also know that if you make things fun and entertaining, regardless of what the message is, people typically get drawn to it. So that's the impetus for the Sorgho Squad books. I'm a huge comic book nerd, okay? I've got a I think, a very nice collection of Amazing Spider-Man back home. I'm just going to brag for a second. I have every issue of Amazing Spider-Man from 1962 to present. Yep, once I hit issue 1000, I'll put it all up for auction, but that includes the first appearance, Amazing Fantasy 15, 1962. So I'm kind of a nerd. In fact, all of the covers are homages to different Spider-Man comic books, and I'll let you decide which ones those are. I'll tell you if you're right. But this adventure series is like Indiana Jones meets Captain Planet. We published 3 books in the series. The first book there's one left over here. The next 3 are actually written. I just haven't published them yet. And yeah, what they're meant to do is share with young people and their families what these grains are and why they matter. But I like to do it, I'm a history nerd also, and so I like to do it in such a way that helps to expose young people to archaeological sites. So in the first book, for example, they go to Mohenjo-Daro, right? Which, of course, as you know, is in the Indus Valley, because you're all really smart and you already knew that. But it's that kind of a thing. We've gotten really good reviews around things like the diversity that's shown in there, because it's a global book. I mean, we didn't set out to make it a diversity book, but it necessarily is, right? Helping young people understand different cultures, not only history and nutrition. The characters, I mentioned earlier that remember the name Jowari. We wanted people to recognize that these grains, wherever you go around the world, have different names. Remember I said that they were first grown in Ethiopia and Mesopotamia and India? That means that they've been ingrained, no pun intended, ingrained into all these different cultures, and now millennia later, every culture has a different name for it. So what we wanted to do with the series was also show people that these are all the same grains. So Sorgho is actually what they call it in Europe, okay? This first character, Jowar, remember Jowari? That's what they call it in India, all right? Mashila, who we find in Ethiopia, well, that's the nomenclature in Ethiopia. She represents food and nutrition, by the way. Jowar represents the industrial applications for sorghum. And then remember I said that in North America we call it Milo? This is Milo. And Milo represents the environmental benefits. In the next 3 books, we actually start introducing some other millets characters as well. So these are available globally. We publish through Ingram Spark, although we are looking for better distribution channels. We're also looking for animation while we're here, trying to take this on to the next level. And let's go to the next slide. I think that tees that up really nicely. This is a book trailer, so we'll just watch this quick, and then we'll talk about some other exciting multimedia platforms that are just fresh off the press. That's you, Max.
So, where are we supposed to find this legendary superhero team?
We need to investigate these ancient locations to find clues, or maybe find the heroes themselves.
Whoa, what is this place?
We're at the ancient ruins of Mohenjo-Daro. All the stories about the hero named Jawa lead here.
Professor, check this out. It looks like a secret door.
There he is. That must be the legendary Jawa.
This place is kind of creepy.
What is going on?
People across the globe don't have enough to eat, and even those who do get stuck eating unhealthy junk.
Having found Jowar, the lost hero of sustainability, Professor Sorgho and his assistant, Alice, return to London to plan their next move.
What's that in the distance?
Why, that appears to be a cornucopia.
Yes, the Fawn of Plenty. That was a symbol people associated with Mashila.
That's gotta be it then. Let's check it out.
It's getting dark down here. Take one of these biodegradable torches.
Spot on, Alice. There is even writing, just like the temple where we found Jowar.
Can you translate it, Professor?
It smells like Marshila's homemade bread.
What happened?
But those crops were better suited to grow in wetter climates and didn't have as many vitamins or minerals compared to sorghum and millet. Let's locate Milo. Keep it moving, gang.
He helped farmers learn to grow sorghum in North America and gradually moved west as the U-Nation expanded across the continent.
Let's go.
Not so fast, child. North America is a big place.
Our heroes wander back into downtown Lincoln to refuel with a tasty meal. Learning that Milo, both the crop and the ancient superhero, were nowhere to be found, it feels as though they've hit a dead end.
He keeps doing that. Please tell me not all jokes are like this in your era.
This place rings a bell. The stairs end here.
There's light coming from the other side.
Look at all these biodiversity.
You mean how diverse the species are here?
Nah, I'm good. I'll go where Joe and Mash go. I just feel like I need to say a cool catchphrase first. Nothing rhymes with biodiversity?
So that's a little. Thank you. So that's a little flavor. Oh, she says Q&A. Just 2 more slides and then really quick. Okay. So we won't show you the whole thing just for the sake of time, but we are in the process of developing a video game for the Sorgho squad. The first chapter will be done here in the beginning of February, and then the subsequent 2 should be all available on the app stores by mid-March. We're working with a company in New Delhi on this. So if you want to run that just for a little bit, max, rather than showing the whole thing. And then we are very close to questions and answers, so be thinking about what you might want to know. Oh, it didn't. Oh. Well, you'll have to trust me on this one. It's on our YouTube channel as well. So I know Monique's got cards around here, and there's QR codes you can scan and everything, and so check those out. All right, let's go on to the next slide then. Yep. So again, we're on Amazon. We're at sorghosquad.com. We actually prefer that you buy it from sorghosquad.com because we retain more of the revenues. The thing that's not up here is we actually have a merch shop as well now. So T-shirts, hats, a lot of these swag that you'll see back here is on there as well. And now we're getting into like plushies and things like that too. So yeah, very exciting. And then you can go on to the next one, which I believe is the last one. So before we do questions and answers quick, you've got my contact information up there. I should have put a QR on there. Monique's going to be upset with me that I didn't. But I had something really exciting happen literally just yesterday. So a fan of ours in Australia, of all places, she decides in her hobby she likes to make songs for nonprofits. And she liked what we're doing. So she sent me, yesterday morning I woke up and I had this song. I'm going to let you give me the first people to hear it outside of our organization. Yeah, so if you can play that, don't tell me it's a PNG.
Joe is building dreams with every seed in the world of industry. He takes the lead, strong and steady. He lays the ground for a future where sorghum's power is found. He's got the vision, he's got the plan, turning fields to gold. He's the man. We're the Sorgho squad. We're here to say sorghum and millets are the way for a healthier world, for a brighter day. We're spreading the word, come what may. It beats so kind, in every grain, good health you'll find. She's the nurturer, the one who cares for the food on your plate. She's always there, with every meal she's healing hearts. In the world of nutrition she plays her part. We're the Sorgho squad, we're here to say sorghum and millets are the way for a healthier world, for a brighter day. a sustainable land. And Prof. Sorgho, with his quirky style, takes us on a journey mile by mile. Alice Atlas, young and bright, bringing old wisdom into the light. With her passion and her spark, she's lighting up the future, leaving a mark, connecting cultures past and new. She's showing us all what we must do. We're the Sorgho Squad, we're here to stay. Sorghum and millets are the way for a healthier world, for a brighter day. We're spreading the word, come what may. So join us now, the time is near. The Sorgho Squad is here to cheer for health, for earth, for all that's right. We'll keep on shining day and night with Joe or Mashila, Milo to Prof. Sorgho, Alice. We need you, together we stand for what is true. The Sorgho Squad, we're here for you.
So this is, thank you. So this is the intersection of entertainment and change, right? Again, farmers can't grow a crop if they can't sell it. Farmers can't sell a crop if consumers don't demand it. Consumers cannot demand a crop if they don't know it exists. And so reaching outside of agriculture in a multimodal platform way, video games, books, songs, looking for animation and distribution as well as more merchandise opportunities. And by the way, all of the proceeds from the Sorgho Squad go back into our work at the Sorghum United Foundation, funding those field-to-market trials, making a difference in people's lives around the world. Literally thousands of people that are reliant on our programs now, which is very humbling as a CEO. So that said, I know we're close on time. I think there's probably time for a couple of questions, and then Monique has some swag and stuff that she wants to share with you. So don't be shy. I'll take a couple of questions. Yes.
I'm curious about how maybe this is something that can be implemented here in the state of Utah, and like if that's something that's been thought about, or like I know in like southern Utah, right, there's some Native American tribes that might benefit from something like this, and I don't know enough to know if that's something that's even doable or something that it's being implemented here in the United States as well.
Yeah, so typically the sorghum belt, we don't do a lot of millets here. We do proso millet, is about the only millet we do in the U.S., but there's dozens of different millets. But the sorghum belt is typically, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, South Dakota. That said, it can certainly be done in those harsher climates, those more drought-prone climates, especially sorghum loves heat, actually, so that would be really, really good. But again, I'll never ask, as a farm kid, I'll never ask a farmer to grow something that they can't sell. Right? So developing those markets in addition to developing the acres, because just growing it to grow it doesn't do us any good, right? It doesn't do them any good, right? So developing those markets at the same time as we develop the opportunities is really important. As I mentioned earlier, we met with the folks from the Beekeepers Association. I know I've got their name wrong, so don't sting me for not getting it correct. But we're always looking for additional folks to collaborate in ways that make sense. In that case, it's from a pollinator standpoint because it's mutually beneficial. So really good question. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes.
I was curious, what policies on a both state and federal level can we implement in order to make growing sorghum more economical for farmers and to increase the market around it in the U.S.?
I love that question, and in fact, on another presentation that I give, I have a slide just on policies. One of them I'm a big fan of is, again, around consumer awareness. In fact, I made this case in D.C., because I still go to D.C., and I don't lobby under the foundation, but I used to work for a member, so I know who to go talk to when I'm there. And we were talking about the Farm Bill. And, most of the Farm Bill is actually SNAP funding, right? Funding for food programs. And the pitch I've made is, why don't we take a portion of that SNAP funding and put it towards a public education campaign, right? Like a Got Milk or the other white meat or whatever, to let these consumers know that these are healthier grains for them and they're better options. And when you do that, by the way, you're going to decrease the medical costs on the federal system as well, because again, like we talked about, the medical benefits. Policies not just specific to the United States, though. There needs to be more education for farmers who haven't grown these grains, right? Or even a lot of countries I go to, the government has no education system for the farmers at all. What we would call an extension system. They don't have it, or it's privately run. Training the trainers. A lot of our agronomists, even here in the U.S., they're trained on corn and soybean. How can we expect an agronomist to go and talk to a farmer about something other than corn and soybean if they're not trained on corn and soybean? If that's all they're trained on, rather. Policies around supporting SMEs. That's really important. Most of the companies globally that are working in the sorghum and millet space, they're SMEs. They're small, medium enterprises, right? The United Nations has a great program right now for SMEs, but it's new. It's growing. It's starting. But if countries are really serious about becoming more food secure and creating more economic opportunities, they need to do a better job in most cases of actually supporting their SMEs. That's a hard thing. I mean, we're a startup. We only started in 2023. I consider us to be a startup NGO. I know how hard it is. I've put, in the last 2 years, $600,000 of my own money into getting this off the ground. Now we're finally starting to see revenue streams. Not every SME can do that. So, yeah, go ahead.
Are you working on embedding any of these storylines in Hollywood films or working with any of those organizations that do that?
Well, that's partially why we're here, and that's why Monique is on staff, is because, this is the one thing that I've known or that I've learned, especially as a self-published author, but now even with the video game and everything else that we do. We do really well at a grassroots level, but it doesn't matter what you create if nobody knows it's there. So working on distribution, it took me a long time to figure out what I wasn't good at. And telling my own story, it was one of those things. Learning about what we're not good at is as important as learning about what we are good at, because then when we know what we're not good at, we can identify the people that can help us with those gaps. But the short answer to your question is yes. The long answer is I used to work in politics, so here you go. All right, back here.
Hi, my name is Nay. Excuse me, I don't have a voice today. I am a filmmaker from Virginia in the East Coast. I actually work really closely with farmers in helping produce educational resources in regards to farming. Whereas we know that farming is inaccessible for a lot of people in our urban communities and our lower income communities. Are there anything or any programs that you all are supporting in regards to helping maybe your product or any resources create or support, I should say, the creation of more grocery stores in our lower income communities?
Mm-hmm. So the answer is not yet, but we're always looking for opportunities to do good. By the way, one of my foundational beliefs is that if you have the opportunity to do good and the ability to do it, then you also have a responsibility to do it. Now, we can't always, because the circumstances aren't always right? But when we can, we have to. I would love to talk to you more about that. I will tell you how easy it is to grow sorghum. One other great big use for sorghum and millets in the U.S. is bird feed. If you go to the store and you buy a bag of bird feed and you look at the ingredients, it's sorghum and millets. Underneath my bird feeder at home, because my birds are messy, I've got sorghum and millets growing. I didn't try to grow them. That's how easy they are to grow, right? Now, I don't harvest them. We certainly could, right? So, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities in urban agriculture, in particular in spaces in which there's not a lot of room to grow a lot of things, and maybe water is a challenge. There are opportunities there also adjacent to that to creating products. Something as simple as grinding it into a gluten-free flour, and then putting that in the local grocery store. Absolutely, yeah. These aren't new concepts. We're not reinventing a wheel. We're just putting new tread on it. Or as I like to say, I'm not regrowing hair. I'm just putting a different wig on it. Oh, you can laugh. It's okay. All right, I think we have time for one more question, maybe. Yeah, we're at time. Okay, before I let you go, Monique's got a message for you. But I want to thank everyone here at the Impact Lounge. I want to thank all of you for being engaged, and I hope this has been a good conversation. If I can be a resource to you at any time, my personal number is on my business cards. You'll see those around here at tables. You can follow me on all the socials, as well as the Sorgho Squad and Sorghum United as well. So before you applaud or anything, let's let Monique have the mic.
Thank you, Nate. I think we should applaud for Nate. Let's give it up for Nate Blum. Thank you for turning that trip around. Thank you to Heather and her team. Guys, I'm Monique LeRae Stinson. I would love for you to make your way to the back. We have a lot of snacks. Please put them in your bags and take them before they go bad. But also we have a ask of you, if you can help us build our fellowship. Just scan those 2 QR codes and grab a swag bag. I personally pack them. There's things for the elements in there. And we really would love some photos with Nate here, fellowship and support. But thank you so much for being here, and have a good rest of your Sundance.